our first one. I know we haven't officially started yet, but if you're here, I hope it means that you have questions. We did not give you microphones, so you're going to have to type your questions. We probably should have put that in the instructions. We might do that for next time, just so people are prepared. But if you guys want to submit your questions either via the Q&A or the chat, Kylie and I will take a look. There are no topics off limits, except you probably don't want our advice. It sounds like sourdough starters, or I don't know, like being organized when it comes to meal prep. That is my downfall. I'm working on it. As much as I love to cook, I just can't do. I have all kinds of tools that I have to use to help me. So if you don't ask us about those two things, we'd prefer to keep it in the OASIS realm. But hey, we'll answer any questions that are burning for you today. No politics either. Let's see. Yeah.
I used ChatGPT to meal plan for my family this week, and I recommend it. It actually works pretty well.
So I just got a system that basically gives you 12 weeks of meals, and what I like about it is that you get like five dinners, but it gives you the grocery shopping list for each week, which is really what I need, right? I just needed to tell me when I go to because otherwise I find myself at the grocery store every other day. Like, oh, I forgot to get a protein for dinner. I have the salad, but I don't have the pork tenderloin or whatever. Yeah. So I need like just the right amount of structure.
Yeah, that's been my problem. Like, oh, we just need milk. Oh, but in reality, we have no food for this week. It's fine.
Okay, so we have our first question here from John. Seeking to utilize a subcontractor's qualifying performance and or qualifying project, and a sub is a sub to another prime. Okay, so basically, I think I have an answer to this. If it doesn't make sense, feel free to add amplifying information. If you are using a subcontractor QP, you may not need the JP3 if your subcontract is really clear about what the subcontractor was engaged to do, and what the period of performance was, and what the total value of the contract happened to be. So the JP3 could be in the optional category. It's really contingent on the quality of the project documentation, like the subcontract award, master service agreement, invoices, whatever you have there. But a JP6 will be required, because that is the form that evaluates that individual contractor's performance as it relates to that work, and there won't be a CPAR. So you can't use the prime CPARs. There is no substitute for that. You need to get a JP6 filled out. So JP3 is a maybe, JP6 is a yes.
And really the lowest risk version is yes and yes, because the JP3, adding it, even if you feel like you have adequate contract documentation, doesn't harm anything.
Good question. Any other questions? Okay, we got one coming in. I got to switch to the Q&A menu. All right. This is good.
Us on our toes.
Well, maybe. Okay, so it said there was a Q&A pending, and it's just taking... Oh, no, it was just you, Kylie.
It's me.
No. All right, if you're just joining, feel free to type your notes in here. If we don't see any questions in the next 30 seconds or so, I'm going to go with some of the questions that have come up that we've been asked over and over again in the last week, because they might apply to you. If you're just joining us, welcome. I know Teams does that thing where once the meeting start time elapses, it re-invites everybody to the meeting. So we might have some folks trickling in. That's a-okay. You don't have microphone privileges. Only Kylie and I have the mic, so please use your chat or Q&A function if you want to send something in. We won't judge. Okay, so things that have come up lately, though, that are probably worth repeating for anybody else on the call. Minimum project runtime. We get asked this a lot, right? And the short answer for a qualifying project is that you need to have at least 6 months of work completed at the time of proposal submission if your work is ongoing. If your project is complete, if it's done and in the past, there's not a minimum runtime, but there is that minimum qualifying dollar threshold still applies. So for many domains in the small business realm, that's $500,000, right? And that has to be the value of the project. If the duration of the project was less than 12 months, you are not allowed to annualize that value. So if you had a 9-month project, and it's completed, whatever got funded for that project is the value you are stuck with. It doesn't matter what your award ceiling was. It only matters what actually ended up getting obligated. Okay, and submit a copy. So I see this other question that came in. Okay, so I'm gonna answer this one to the best of my ability. One ground rule that I will put out is that we might tell you that you have a really nuanced situation and we might need to have an offline conversation just because we could spend 30 minutes really getting into the weeds of the particulars of your case. But at a high level, if you don't have approved billing rates, right? So if you don't have some sort of forward pricing rate agreement that has previously been approved for another contract, then what you're going to have to do is basically bid rates that you're going to use on OASIS. And you're going to have to tell GSA, here's what our indirect cost pools look like, right? Here's what fringe means at our company. Here's how we calculate it. Here's what our overhead is. And we're going to apply all those things within the cost model template that they give you to establish the LCATs for each of the, I think it's 19 or 20 labor categories that you're responding to here. And then you're going to have this accompanying narrative that just shows your homework of how you do this. The reports generated directly from the offeror's accounting system. This is a new requirement in phase 2. If you are really brand new to government contracting, it might look a little bit different than somebody who's been doing it for 5 years, because many people have their accounting systems kind of already set up to account for the fringe rates, the overhead rates, and the like. So for the specific, what does the evidence look like? That's going to vary from contractor to contractor. But basically what they're looking for is for you to substantiate and be able to explain how things are allocated in your system, what it looks like, and how you've defined each of the categories. I hope that helps. If it triggered any subsequent questions, let me know. But that's a fairly nuanced one. Okay. Yeah, so combination, if you don't have those rates, remember it's the narrative, it's going to be documentation from the system, as well as the cost model. Okay, back to other things that we've been asked lately. So we talked about minimum project runtime, how to do those values. Determining relevance. This is probably the only subjective part of OASIS Plus, right? And GSA has done a good job in trying to remove the subjectivity from this and make it a little bit more universal so that everybody's playing by the same rules. But that doesn't mean that it's always a black and white interpretation. So when we are looking at how to align projects and how we want to claim relevance, there's a couple methods we use, and I'm going to let Kiley talk to. I'm going to tell you what I do, and then I'll let Kiley share any additional tricks or tips that she has. Something I will mention for the good of the group is there's a whole document about automatically relevant NICS codes and PSC codes. So this would be the easy button for some vendors. It's the JP4, I think, right? That outlines, I think that's the attachment number for both the unrestricted and small business. Yeah. And so by domain, it'll say, if you have a project coded in this NICS code or this PSC code, you can claim automatic relevance for your project. There's a catch, though, in that if your task order, for example, has that NICS code only because it's on an IDIQ where everything that's on that contract gets the same NICS code. So an example would be the previous OASIS contracts, right? Where everything in pool 1 got assigned automatically one NICS code. That would not be good enough to demonstrate automatic relevance. So the PSC code is a little bit more reliable. If you happen to have one that matches that JP4, what they have in the domain. But the best practice is to go through and just look at your statement of work and find tasks that align to the definitions of the domains. And you're not having to do a keyword search that says, well, there's a sub-bullet that says systems analysis, and so my task has to be called systems analysis. Really what you should do is look at the sentences that are at the very top of the domain description, right? Because that's going to say logistics in the realm of OASIS Plus means these kind of services, or management and advisory are things like analysis, things that further the business development or the business's organization. And so you start there, and then where you can, that's after you've established that the main point of your tasks on the contract align with the main point of the domain, you can use the subsequent sub-bullets as additional reinforcement that the tasks that you performed match those same kind of services. But it's not an exhaustive list. So you could have something that doesn't exactly fit that keyword search that is still relevant to the domain. And that's why GSA gives you that 1,000-character narrative within the JP3. So you can give them 2 or 3 sentences that just explain your logic that a client signs and that you can submit as your evidence.
Yeah, I would also add that the JP5 is a great product that you can work from when you're looking at your contracts, especially if you're not a technical speaker, because that can give you some of the context of how OASIS Plus is defining those functional areas. And so those are your keywords that you're searching. And again, that JP3 is the catch-all. So when you can't find that, or when you have work that's not substantiated in your SAL clearly, a JP3 can catch you and make sure that you're covering all of your bases for your submission.
Okay, and I saw the follow-up question for the rates from John as it relates to, do you really have to develop your own rates, or if you have, existing rates? And it really depends on if the rates are approved. So if you don't have the forward pricing rate agreement letter, or something that officially says like, yes, the company rates are approved here, then, and honestly, even if you do, you're still permitted to bid different rates for OASIS Plus. And I will tell you what a lot of people do is in the solicitation, they tell you what the max rate is in the ceiling. So you can bid that rate where you need the justification, or where most companies find themselves needing justification, is if they are bidding something that exceeds that that rate range. So everybody has to do the narrative and explain their own company's accounting, but that's a different problem set than saying, and here's how we got to these rates. Like, it is an okay thing to say, we are using, like, we followed the same rationale that GSA did to determine the max ceiling for these labor categories. And, at the SME level, this is what we're going to bid as well. Now, it's a very binary. You can bid the max, and as long as you're compliant, you're going to be fine. I don't want to say they don't care, but it's a little bit of a check in the block exercise, because these are just the rates at the IDIQ level, and they don't apply to every kind of task order. If you read the section on the cost price volume, they'll tell you that these rates only apply in certain circumstances to only certain types of task orders. So they don't apply to OCONUS work. They don't apply to cleared staff. And I think they only apply to like the time and materials, level of effort type contracts when there's not competitive, or when there's not competition expected. So it's really a narrow set that these max rates apply. So like I said, on phase 1, it was a kind of standard practice, for better or worse, for people to just bid the max. That way you at least have the max rates built into your IDIQ contract. Okay. I'm going to let people think about what I just said, keep typing, and I'm going to go pontificate on qualifying projects versus relevant qualifying projects versus federal experience projects, because I know there's a little bit of nuance and maybe not confusion, but just nuance here that it's really important to get right. So I do have another slide. Sorry to bore you with lots of words on a page, but this is just foundational to understanding how your projects are going to fit together and score you points on OASIS, right? So the very first thing you have to do is make sure that any experience you're using actually meets the definition of a qualifying project. And there's 5 criteria here, right? So the first thing is that it actually has to be one of the correct project types. If you look at this list, and this comes directly from the RFP, you cannot use a SIBR, right? In all cases, a SIBR is permitted as a federal experience project, but a SIBR may not count as your primary contract type, right? So you could have a single contract, you could have an OTA, you could have a task order, you could have a collection of task orders, you could have an agreement as a subcontractor, like a subcontractor project would be considered a distinct single contract. But you can't have some of the more non-traditional, like there's other things out there, other project types out there that the government may have used to secure services that would not fit the definition of one of these 5 initial project types. So important to understand what you're working with. If you're working with federal prime experience, there's a real easy checksum. If you look into FPDS, which maybe is going away at the end of the month, maybe isn't. Don't get me started on that. Actually, we will talk about that next. But if you look in there and you pull up the record and you look in the top left corner, it's going to tell you if it was an IDC, it's going to tell you if it was a task order, if it was a purchase order, if it was a call order. It's going to be labeled on there. So if you have any kind of confusion around what contract type it was, that's a good place to start. The second really important part is that it has to have been a contractor order for services as defined in FAR Part 37, or this Revolutionary FAR Overhaul Deviation 2025 TAC. I was trying to say dash and TAC at the same time. TAC 37. And this is important because if you had a contract that was really for products and you sold stuff, it may not fit the definition of a qualifying project. So where we see this blur a little bit is if you were doing prototyping and delivering a solution, those might just need a little bit of a deeper look to make sure that you can point to some services, because there's not an easy coded field necessarily in FPDS to say, yes, this is 100% sure for services, but there's things that you can do, right? So looking at the NICS code that was assigned to the project, if the name of the NICS code says something about services, like that's great. If you had a statement of work that reflected things that people had to do, that's another good way to show that it was services. The other thing we talked about is meeting or exceeding the minimum average annual value, which changes based on domain, right? So you have to make sure you understand which tab of that JP1 you're looking at. Make sure you get into the right score sheet, and it's right at the top. So make sure you take a look at, T&E versus logistics versus facilities versus R&D. Those minimums do vary. And then I already talked about the duration. So ongoing with a minimum of 6 months, or if it's completed, there's no minimum there, but you can only use the actual dollars obligated. And then you cannot have an associated record of negative past performance. So this would be a score less than a 3.0. If your CPARs, you got satisfactory across the board, then you can use that as a qualifying project. If you had all satisfactories and a marginal, that's going to drop you below that 3.0 average. So there's a whole section of the RFP that you can get into in section M that tells you exactly how to calculate what your average score was. But basically, it's not rocket science, right? If you received a score in an area, then you have to count that towards your total and then take the average of the number of areas evaluated to get that numerical value. Now, one distinction that I want to make here: not having a record of negative past performance does not mean you had positive past performance. This is a different definition. So when you get into the scorecards and you're looking at those blue rows that are past performance points, this is where we've spent a lot of time talking about it's not a one-to-one point exchange, right? So you have to have 3 relevant projects that had positive past performance ratings to even get 1 point. 4 projects would get you 2 points. 5 projects would max you out at 3 points. But if the example that I just talked about applies to you, where you had satisfactory across the board, that would not get calculated in. That would not be considered a qualifying project for, it would not be credit eligible for those past performance points because you did not have a positive rating. Positive has to be above a 3.0. One other note here. In the domains, when you're looking at your scorecard and the beautiful color coding, when you're tallying things up for your qualifying projects, oops, sorry, 1 second. Screen is very slow. So sorry, for the blue rows, they're not the past performance credits. You can still earn points when it comes to scale, when it comes to integrated experience, when it comes to management and staffing. You can still earn points for qualifying projects, even if they're not relevant to the domain. So relevance is its own determination, but why it matters is that only your relevant qualifying projects are eligible for those past performance credits. So everybody probably by this point knows that you can't have more than 5 qualifying projects for a given domain. You could have a situation where you bid 4 relevant qualifying projects and use a 5th qualifying project. You won't get points for relevance, but maybe you're using it because it gets you points for scale, or you had a lot of cleared staff, or you did a lot of surge work that was easy to demonstrate, or you covered multiple functional areas or had a lot of LCATs. So you could there's still a use case for a project being a QP, even if it's not a relevant QP, in certain domains and in certain circumstances. And one that I'll point out is in the intelligence services domain, for example, relevance only gets you 2 credits per project. Do you need relevant projects? Absolutely. But you get more points for having cleared staff on a qualifying project in the Intel domain than you do for having a relevant project. It's 2 credits for relevance. It's 3 credits for 5 or more cleared staff. So there's just situations where you might want to look at your project lineup, which is why we encourage you to use that project tracker and say, okay, what do these projects actually cover and how would they score specific to the domains that I think I'm interested in? Hopefully that clears up a little bit of the relevant QP versus QP. These are just some examples of services contracts. We will send this deck out so that you have it. And then we talked about the average annual values, right? Like if the project is ongoing, you can use the total contract value, but you're also supposed to use the period of performance that includes all option years. So it's usually a bigger duration, higher value, but longer duration of the contract. So that can sway what the numbers work out to. And then we gave you some examples for FPDS. And then the federal prime contractor experience is something I definitely want to foot stomp because I know there's confusion around this. These are those green rows on the spreadsheet, right? It is possible that you might have a qualifying project or a relevant qualifying project, a QP, that is also an FEP, federal prime or federal experience project, right? But not every FEP will be a QP. And the reason for that is that number one, the dollar threshold is lower for an FEP than it is for a QP. The same rules apply in terms of how to calculate value, right? So if it's ongoing, you take the ceiling. If it's completed, you take the amount obligated. But there's no relevance determination for FEPs. They could be anything that you did. Well, not anything, but like any prime work that you did for services, that definition still applies. But it might not have anything at all to do with the M&A domain or the logistics domain. It might just be some other task order that you had as a standalone. So you can use projects from teammates to get credits in this area. And then you really need to take a look because there are, again, deviations from domain to domain. And I'm thinking in particular about the R&D domain. That one has different thresholds, different qualifying point credit areas than the other domains do as it relates to federal experience projects in particular. So definition of a qualifying federal experience project, again, has to be a prime contract award. If we can't find this in FPDS, or if you did not get a contract form issued directly from a federal agency, it is not a federal prime contract. And I know not everything is in FPDS because of funding sources and some work is classified, and I get it, but that's why this listation tells you that you need to have the contract award form. But it also has to be, there's specific project types that are allowed here, right? So we talked about this at the beginning where you could use a contract grant or cooperative agreement in this setting. That is something that is permissible for a federal experience project. The minimum average value is $250,000 a year, so it's a little bit lower. So that's why you might have some projects that are FEPs but not QPs. And then same thing with ongoing duration or minimum period of performance, and it has to be that order for services. So I just highlighted that in yellow so that it's front of mind when you're evaluating your projects.
I'm glad you mentioned FPDS records and contract paperwork because Patrick asked a question and everybody has that like tickle in the back of their head of FPDS is going away on I think it's the 24th of February. And now how are we supposed to do this? And the answer is a little bit of we don't know quite yet, besides providing additional contract documentation to substantiate what you're trying to say. But in the same way that they gave us an FPDS sample, I imagine they'll give us a SAM.gov sample or a way that they expect records to be shown from their own system when those things are up and working.
Yeah, and I think that might be one of the reasons that we haven't seen Q&A yet. They might be working through that. Now, the other thing that I will mention, though, is that if you go to FPDS and you see that little banner and says, oh, you're going to have to go to sam.gov and use the database. If you go to the database in sam.gov or whatever they're calling it, the search function is not functional yet. So they refer you back to FPDS. So just because the system cuts over on, the 24th or the 26th, it's an even day at the end of February. I'm confident of that. I'm not confident of which day. It doesn't mean that all of the functionality is going to go away. And I'm sure we're going to see guidance around if your project is completed, like the records will still be accessible and you can do it that way. Or if it's ongoing, here's what we expect you to use instead, right? So I do think we're going to get not an alternate set of directions, but like some amplifying guidance around what to do there. But I also would not be surprised if FPDS remains a searchable, exportable database for a while. Because this is,
Patrick,
they've been threatening to shut it down for forever. So
yeah. So we'll see how long it actually takes.
Yeah.
Patrick teed this up beautifully for us with his two questions, one about FPDS and the other about tagging. The real answer about is there a definitive right way to tag documents is no. If something worked well on your original submission and it helped your team track everything and everybody was on the same page and you got the information across that you needed to get across, great. Stick with that. That works. The real thing is that having a standard set makes it easier for the evaluator. Having supplemental information in there that this is a qualifying project, it's relevant. This is the auto relevance section that I'm highlighting, or this is a qualifying project, it's relevant. Here's one of the subfunctional areas. This is the subfunctional area I'm talking about, and this is the evidence. So your tag can be, I don't think there's technically a word limit on it, but your tag can be as informative as you'd like or as simple as you'd like. It just needs to make sure that there's no question for the evaluator as they're looking through your tags. And that members of your team can replicate it. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, there's one caveat to that, and I'll give you another best practice here. The one caveat is that there's some basic project data where if you're in Symphony, it tells you what tag to use. But this is things like period of performance, total contract value, cost reimbursement. So when you log into Symphony, when you go to upload your first project, pay attention to those tags that are in parentheses and just build those out in your little list, because you're going to tag period of performance the same way every time. But to Kylie's point, you can always add more detail, right? So when we do our project markups, we actually don't just tag POP. We tag POP start date. We tag POP end date. Because by the way, those might not be found in the same document. So you need to know which one you're referring back to. But her point about having a standardized system that is efficient and clear is absolutely on point. Like you need to make sure that the best thing to do is to basically create a little key before you start tagging anything so that everybody on your team is doing it the same way. And so that when you go back to do your QC, you're not trying to remember like, oh, well, in this document, I called the QP tag this for domain relevance, but in this one, I called it this, because you're going to have to type in what your tag is. Symphony is not like a sentient system that can go in and intuit anything. It's going to look exactly for what you tell it to search for. So it's really important to kind of keep it simple, keep it clean, and be concise. The other thing I want to mention is that we do recommend tagging all of the elements with the QP or the FEP tag, those 5 things that make it a QP. So you might have things that are a dual tag, where in your comment, it says QP, but it also says POP, right? Or QP, and it says services, right? Something that shows that, hey, this is one of those 5 elements that qualifies this project as a QP, because we had to do that. They kind of introduced that requirement midstream last time, and all of a sudden we had to go back to a lot of our FPDS records and a lot of our contract award forms and show, yes, here's where I can prove to you it's a services contract. Here's where I can prove to you that it's within its recency period. Here's where I can prove to you that it meets the minimum threshold. So yeah, our recommendation is keep the tags themselves simple, but if you need to add just a tiny bit of explanatory text to the comment, like the actual comment bubble in PDF, that's permitted. So hopefully that helps. Okay, breaking out $1.2 million from QP in the form of JP3, using it on a non-award. Yeah, okay. So, all right, John, I think I understand the crux of the question. If you have a So I guess the only part I'm kind of wondering about is that the original word was 6 million. Is that like the total ceiling and the 1.2 is your average annual value? Or are you just saying, I just want to know if are we working with a $1.2 million average annual value or a $6 million average annual value? Annual 6 million. Okay. So you've got plenty to work with here. So I'm gonna say some things and hopefully we get to an answer in your question. So forgive me if it's wandering. If you are claiming one project across multiple domains, I'm gonna tell you right now, the thing that you can do to make your life easier is to use a JP3 and just put every domain that you think you're going to claim on that JP3. And when you do that, it's going to ask you, all right, what is the domain you're claiming relevance to? And you're going to say logistics. And then it's going to ask you, what is the threshold for this? And you're going to tell it $500,000 if you're a small business. And then it's going to ask you, well, how much of your project are you claiming? And then you're going to put in a value of your choosing. If you have CLINs that you're going to cite to establish that $500,000 minimum, great. You can add all those up and see what they total. If it's a lot more nebulous, which many contracts are because they were not written to cleanly fit into an OASIS Plus domain, this is some more of that subjectivity. And you're going to have to be able to say, well, I'm going to either just divide my value by the 3 domains because the work was evenly split and there's really no way to do it. Or I think that the lion's share of the tasks were for logistics. So I'm going to allocate 60% of the annual value to that. And then 20% or whatever clears the $500,000 threshold. I'm an English major, so do not make me do math in public, but whatever clears the threshold for the other subsequent domains, but they're all going to be listed on the same sheet. And so the reason for that is an evaluator can look at it and say, okay, you had $6 million worth of work per year to work with. I see that, we have some auto relevance, maybe if it applies to your specific situation for this domain, but you're still going to have to name a number, even if it's auto relevant. So you're kind of making it up. I don't want to say you're making it up. That makes it sound like you're misrepresenting. You're using your best judgment about the work that you performed on the contract, and you have some discretion in how to allocate the dollars. But it's not as formulaic as you might think. So you could say, yeah, if you want to use 1.2 for logistics, then so when you say you still show 6 million, I guess I'm not clear on where you're saying you want to show that. What I can tell you is that if your average annual value is $6 million, it's not a good idea to claim $6 million worth of relevance for every domain, right? Like it'd be a little bit sus if you said on a yearly basis, we did $6 million worth of support and $6 million of it was for T&E and $6 million was for logistics and $6 million was for M&A. Like you have enough project value to work with there. There's no reason to not use a smaller value split across the domains. Because once you're over the threshold, it doesn't matter how much over the threshold you are. When it comes to scale points, that's for the whole QP. That's not the scale that's relevant to the domain. So that's an important distinction. So don't overthink it, I guess, is the bottom line in terms of how you're going to allocate the funds. Make sure you name a number that you can defend based on your statement of work and the work that you performed, that your client will agree with, and that clears the threshold and doesn't totally blow your average annual value out of the water. Because nothing applies. So I guess the other thing to keep in mind here is, even if it's automatically relevant, you're going to have to claim it as automatically relevant and tag that in the document. So like they're not going to just give you the point, like they're not going to do anything with the values you don't tell them to do something with, if that makes sense. It's still a good idea to say, yes, here's what we have that demonstrates that we're over $500,000 in the logistics domain. I'm going to cite these tasks. Because you might not need a JP3 if you're only using it for one thing. But it sounds like you're trying to use a project across multiple domains, in which case just get the JP3. And that way you don't even have to stress about, are my tags going to be good enough? Because you've had somebody else validate it. Yeah. So yeah, you could allocate that remaining $4.8 million if it accurately reflects that you did work aligned to those domains in that quantity. So again, a little bit squishy, but it's all about what you can defend, right? All right, switching back over to Q&A. I know we're
a
at
question
time.
about whether subcontracts can count as a qualifying project, and that is yes, they absolutely can.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Subcontract experience can. Yeah. So that 1A is what gives you permission to use it. And the only challenging thing, right, is that all the other 4 things still have to be true. So you still have to get a good JP6 signed on it. You still have to be over your threshold. And it's a good idea to still hopefully have it be relevant to one of the domains. That's not a qualifying thing, but yeah, there are circumstances in which what was I going to say? Oh, the thing that makes subcontracts tricky, and I think we talked about this a little bit already. If you've not discovered this with your own subcontract documentation yet, a lot of times primes will not name a ceiling in the subcontract. They will fund things incrementally, and so your ceiling aligns with whatever they funded to date. And so if you're in option year 2, but there's 2 more option years to go, and your subcontract lists the full period of performance, but your most recent mod only shows funding through the option year that you're in, that can be detrimental to your average annual value calculations. So it's really important that you know that up front.
Yeah, one of the other things we've seen is that sometimes the subcontract includes references to the IDIQ PWS. And so you may have to kind of self-consolidate those documents into a single PDF, or just substantiate that the PWS that you're referencing is associated with your subcontract in some way.
Yeah, and in those cases, a JP3 can be really helpful. And actually, that reminds me of that brings up another question that we get asked a lot, a little bit closer to submission usually, as people are actually uploading things. And the question is, should I combine my documents and have fewer files? And there are reasons to do that. There are also reasons to leave things separate. I will tell you my preferred, the way that Rebecca's brain thinks and organizes information. I think it's a really good checksum to, if you have a separate PWS and it has the contract ID somewhere on it, right? So you're clear that it's not just some rando PWS that you pulled from somewhere else. If you have a PWS that tracks to the project, you have a separate contract award form, you have a separate JP6, and you have a separate JP3, I would leave those 4 things separate, just to make it really easy that, like, hey, this is, because when you're going through and you're trying to say, did I account for everything that I need to show as my, like, as what's been mandated to show for each project, then you can do that check really fast. If you end up combining things, which again, there's reasons to do that, right? Sometimes you get a PDF SAO that doesn't have a contract number anywhere on it. And you're like, well, how am I going to link this to the rest of the project? You are permitted to make a new PDF, but in your file name, I would absolutely call it the, like, contract award form and PWS so that you're telling yourself, I have already combined these things and this is where it lives. That way you don't get tossed out because they say, well, we didn't see a PWS in there. Like, well, you had to go to page 27. Like, you're in the clear that way. Okay. We only scheduled this for 30 minutes, so I'm happy to stay on if anybody else has questions. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. We're going to try to do these monthly. If you have questions, you can send them in ahead of time. Our email, you can send them to me or to Kylie. But we also have a collective inbox, which is just oasishelp@tridentproposals.com. We will not judge. We are happy to have little one-off conversations. Although if you hire us for coach and review, you get as much of this as you can take during the time you're preparing your proposal. So that's how you get the best access to us. Otherwise, we will do these on a space available basis and try to give you the best help we can. But yeah,
Rebecca, if you could describe yourself as any single domain, which domain would you describe yourself as, and why?
I don't know. I don't know.
Just put you on the spot there.
I know, like, maybe management and advisory, because I feel like that one's the bossiest one, but I don't know. What would you say? Not financial services, not technical
not financial services. I thought it would be fun to be in the marketing and PR one, because I thought, well, maybe all the movie contracts would come out there, and maybe I could, like, I don't know, meet Sam here and I don't know, somebody cool.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah.
You're not boss.
Yes, my natural leadership, I think, aligns me to the management advisory domain. Does that sound convincing? No.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Maybe social services.
Not financial services. Social services. The professional snack maker. That's it.
Yes. Where's that one?
Where's that one?
Awesome. Okay. I don't see anybody else chatting, so we'll go ahead and end the event. Get this posted at some point.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.